February 21st, 1996, Principles of Infinite Way, 4th class. Good evening. Let's begin. Last week we almost finished up with the nature of man, if I recall, and we had only karma to go. Were there any questions about what we said last week? First of all, does anybody want to work on anything in particular that we already talked about? I guess not. Karma is typically thought of as an Eastern teaching, and but it's also a Christian teaching. It was sort of a Jewish teaching, although the eye for eye, tooth for a tooth is more of a revenge-motivated thing rather than a karma-motivated thing. But in the Christian religion, the statement we hear all the time is, as you sow, so shall you reap. And that's strictly a statement of karma. I mean, it's obviously true in the mundane sense, but it's the point is that that's true in general. It's true spiritually. The first thing to know about karma is that God is not involved in karma. Karma is not a reward-punishment thing based on a God or any external influence or anything like that that's doing this. Karma is the direct result of your actions. Your actions in the 3D world set in motion certain events, and both materially and spiritually, and those events will come back to you. If we look at our understanding a little bit of the nature of God, that and the nature of man, that all of this is a spiritual being. I mean, we are God. God's consciousness is manifested individually as us, and we are all manifestations of God, and we are all one with God, and therefore we are all one with each other. Then the obvious implication is, whatever I do to you, I'm doing to myself, and it becomes a literal truth. And it is a literal truth, and that is the way it works. And that's what all the stuff that Jesus was talking about, passing by the beggar or the crippled people on the other side of the road and things like that. And he also said, insomuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me, and talking about both good things and bad things that people have done or might do to other people. Jesus was saying, insomuch as you've done it unto the least of these people, that you've given something to a poor beggar, you've given it to me. And the implication also is that you've given it to yourself, because Jesus was always aware that me and you are the same. So all of that stuff applies directly to ourselves. So the basic Christian principle of karma is also the basic infinite way principle of karma. What you do will result to you. If you do good to somebody else, the good will come back. If you do evil to somebody else, the evil will come back. It may not come back necessarily in this lifetime. Don't get focused in on the fact that there are bad people living in big houses. We don't know what they did last lifetime, and we don't know what they'll do next lifetime, but the fact is that before we're done with all this, we will either pay our karma or transcend it? And the answer actually is that eventually we have to transcend it, because every act we do may be a repercussion of karma, but it's also causing karma. So as long as you're playing in the 3D world, that's going to continue. It's not just about material things, giving money to beggars or beating on people or stuff like that. It's true about everything in your life. If you extend love to people, you will receive love. If you extend hate to people, you will experience hate. If you extend truth to the world, you will experience truth. It's true about everything. People tend to limit it to, physical punishment and things like that, but it's not that at all. All the things that we can do to another, we're doing unto ourselves, and all of it will come back. And in AA, we share it to keep it. We're giving it to ourselves. In AA, we work with others. We're working with ourselves. In AA, the real rewards are from loving other people and working with them. We're loving ourselves and working with ourselves. The joy that comes in AA is the joy of working with others, and they're not the one that's joyful. We're the ones that are joyful. So it really does work, and the AA environment is just a wonderful environment to observe this. And the other thing that appears to be true to me, and I haven't heard Joel say this anywhere, but Barbara alludes to it and a couple of other teachers. When I say Barbara, I'm referring to Barbara Mull, who was one of Joel Goldsmith's students who taught around here and did some real nice work about the nature of error and about developing concrete techniques to deal with the 3D, 4D world relationship rather than just the statements of truth that were typically coming from Joel. In any event, I've heard statements from her and also from a couple of his other teachers. As we progress on this path, as our awareness expands, as we become more aware of truth, the cycle time of karma gets shorter. And we talk in AA again about the road getting narrower. The fact is that the price you pay as you become more aware of the oneself, then as you do things to other people, that affects yourself to oneself more immediately, and it gets tighter and it gets faster. And it turns out that feels like a bad thing. You know, you do something and like it gets to where you tap somebody on the shoulder over here and you get slapped, a minute later. But the fact is, it also is very good in the sense that we progress faster and faster as a result of that. I mean, we get our lessons immediately instead of getting your lesson 3 lifetimes later when you don't know what it's all about. As we get more aware of the oneness, our lessons happen faster and the teaching gets tighter, and that's very good because that also increases the rate at which we progress. It also extends to spirituality. I mean, as we become more spiritual, then what comes back to us, as we more contact God and become at one with God, we're becoming at one with harmony, love, grace, those things, and that starts manifesting in our life. So if we sow, and this is what in the Christian, in the New Testament, undoubtedly one of the letters from somebody to somebody in the Corinthians or somebody, if you sow to, the words aren't going to be exactly right, but essentially he says if you sow to the flesh you will reap corruption, and if you sow to the spirit you will reap everlasting life. And what that's saying is if you're out there playing with material things, trying to acquire stuff, you will be in that hopeless 3D karmic circle. Everything you acquire you can lose. Everything you acquire will degenerate. Everything you acquire can be stolen. It's the good-evil duality, and as fast as you make any headway in the 3D world, you're going to set up the potential for the opposite side of that, and it will happen. If you sow to the Spirit, which means if you spend your time on spiritual work, doing the reading that we talk about, hanging out with the people that are on the like path that we talk about, and doing the meditation that we talk about, you are sowing to the Spirit, and that's as you sow, so shall you reap. That comes harmony, grace, divine love, all those neat attributes. So that's what that's about. There's something else, but it went away. Our sowing is both conscious and subconscious, and it's still true. It doesn't need to be a conscious act that causes the sowing, that causes the repercussion. What you accept into your mind determines your experience. If you're accepting, hate and dishonesty and things like that into your mind, then you will be manifesting that in your experience. So, and if you're accepting truth, the more that you read truth, the more that you accept truth into your life, the more that you meditate and make contact with truth, the more you have that experience, that will manifest in your life. So this works, on every level imaginable. It is the content of your consciousness that is determining your experience. And so what you're feeding your mind is what you're sowing. Yes, Diane.
Let's say you're sitting with a group of people whose consciousness is into something like some negative type of thing. And you're all in consciousness, you're in the room with. Does that become part of yours, and then you, kind of reap that as well? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, and that's exactly what it's all about. There is a collective consciousness. This is what's known as world mind or carnal mind, and Joel goes at great length, and we'll talk about this a lot next week when we get into the nature of error after we've done prayer and meditation. But Joel talks a lot about the influence from world mind, human mind, the collective human consciousness, as being like subliminal advertising, in that it comes into your mind without your being aware of it. It enters at a subliminal level. It seeps into your mind as if it emerges from the collective consciousness or subconsciousness, and you act on that unless you are taking steps to introduce truth. Now, if you're sitting in that same room and you're listening to that conversation, you're hearing all that negativity, and you're sitting in your mind, you're sitting there and quietly in your mind saying nonsense, that's quite sufficient. Then you don't have to buy it. But if you don't take action, it will happen. People can catch the flu sitting in their house with no contact with people who are in the neighborhood, when there's a flu epidemic running around, and you can be in your house and you'll never read about the flu epidemic or listen to television or know about it, and nobody will come to your house, and you can come down with the flu, because that's what people are believing in. It really does work that way, and yet if you do the conscious work beforehand to know that there is no power in these concepts of disease, and are doing what we call protective work, then that won't happen. Protective work is not protecting yourself against the flu, it's protecting yourself against the consciousness that believes in flu.
When you say consciousness, it is the content of your consciousness that results in your experience?
Mm-hmm.
When I think of the word consciousness, I'm thinking of it as there's only one consciousness.
Yeah, you've caught me in an error that I made a distinction that we should keep consciousness as the universal global God consciousness, and we should be referring to our awareness of consciousness, and I should have been doing that. You nailed me. Very good. what we're aware of, the amount of awareness of consciousness that we have, and the conditioned content of our intellect will determine our experience. We will have fun when we get to the nature of mind, but the quick preview is that whatever your mind is being exposed to is what you're manifesting, and your mind is exposed either to your intellect, that collection of conditioning, personal memories, personal history, and all of that you have, and that also has input from world mind and that human consciousness, carnal mind, or it has input from God, and you can choose the source of the stuff which reaches your mind. Your mind will manifest what's there. It's unconscious. Mind is unconscious. It's unconditioned. It manifests whatever is going on. The words get hard because intellect isn't the right word, and mind isn't. I'm using mind as this manifesting attribute. Consciousness isn't the right word because consciousness we're using for the global thing. But if I could talk about your human consciousness, then that is what's driving your mind, and that's being influenced by world mind. It's being influenced by God mind, and our world human consciousness is being influenced by God consciousness. It's being influenced by conditioning. It's being influenced by all these factors, and that's what's determining your experience. We're going to spend a lot of time on the nature of the mind. That's the fun one. We're just getting all this stuff sorted out first, and we'll do prayer and meditation this week and probably get through with it, and then next week we'll do the nature of error, and then comes mind. And mind is fun. I got some wonderful stuff to read from Meg Johnson. We'll just play with it. God is not involved in karma. You sow it, you reap it. It has nothing to do with God at all. It has nothing to do with punishment. It's just as inexorable as we think laws of physics are. Goes around, it comes around. I was listening to a tape of Joel the other night, and he was talking a little bit about karma, and he makes the law that most prayer is a request for a karmic law to violate itself. Mm-hmm. Evil people wanting something good to happen, or people not wanting their just desserts, or foxhole Christians praying to be saved and things like that. Most prayer is a request that karmic law violate itself, and I just love that. That's just a wonderful clarity. That's what most prayer is about. And the only other thing about karma is that karma can be terminated instantaneously by arriving at the fourth dimensional consciousness. If you rise into a permanent experience of grace, a permanent experience of God consciousness, a permanent experience that the 3D world is hypnotism, consciousness is void. Once you know it's a dream, it's a dream. Karma is voided. Once you know it's a dream, it's a dream. What you dreamed last night, you may have had a dream last night that you were a truly evil person and you went around terrorizing people and doing all sorts of mayhem and destruction, and you wake up this morning and you don't have to pay for that karma. You will have to pay for the karma that's generated by the mind that created that, but what you did in the dream you won't have to pay karma for. Similarly, when you wake up from this dream, the karma is over because it's part of the dream. The karma is part of the 3D world. It's not part of the 4D world. And the purpose is to realize fourth dimensional consciousness and recognize the illusoriness of the 3D consciousness.
So was Joel there? Was Joel Goldsmith there?
Yeah.
Where he doesn't have to...
Oh, in the fourth...
Free of karma in the fourth dimensional consciousness. Yeah, he really essentially he got the whole experience back in 1928, but he didn't have the words for it, and then he kept having revelations, and he got the words for a while, but then for the last many years, I listened to his tapes, and on many occasions, like maybe yearly, or at least every other year, he would go through another significant level of what he calls initiation. And what this means is another level of rising in awareness to the point that he had more clarity on the fact, on the unreality of things and the oneness of things and such like. And he was approaching, or perhaps had approached, the level of fourth dimensional consciousness. Robert's there always. Robert has no karma. It's inapplicable. Robert is a spiritual teacher that I spent 5 years with up until 6 months or so ago, and he was struck totally enlightened when he was 14, and it was a one-shot thing, and he stayed there forever, and he's today 68, and he's had a karma-free lifetime. He knows, he never fails to know the illusoriness of the entire 3D appearance.
So his body with Parkinson's disease is not a karmic thing?
No.
Okay.
From your viewpoint, you can say what you want. From his viewpoint, there is no body with Parkinson's disease. You keep making the 3D mistake. We can't even talk about a disease, a body with Parkinson's disease. That's not real either.
Okay. That's what I see. That's not what he sees.
Well, he sees the same picture you see. If you both go to the movie and you see the same movie, but he knows it's a movie, and you don't. And his body to him is no more real than the bodies on the movie screen, And you may be looking at the bodies on the movie screen and discussing the karma about them, and Robert's laughing about the fact that it's on that piece of magnetic tape up in the projection room or wherever it is, And that's why karma disappears when you're in the fourth dimensional consciousness, because the one who is experiencing karma is no longer there. See, the one who is experiencing karma, the three-dimensional person who's experiencing karma, is part of the illusion. It's not real. Karma must go. The one who's experiencing karma must go. Hence, Robert's always telling us to do what the Atma-vichara, the self-inquiry, Always the thing is, ask to whom this is coming, Find out who this person is. Don't worry about your karma. Don't worry about your life. Ask who's experiencing this, And the point is that once you realize that this person who's experiencing it is not experiencing it, but is part of the experience, then it all becomes nonsense, and the whole thing just drops. So, anything else on man or karma?
Yeah, I several months back read a popular book, The Celestine Prophecy, and it suggested in there that, and I don't know if this is karma or reincarnation, it suggested some dilemmas were like passed on generationally. Would that be karma that book was referring to, or
some dilemmas are passed on?
Well, like
generation.
Like our
example.
I don't know, the book. Like, I'm trying to think a character. Like, for example, my father fought workaholism during his lifetime. So, and if he never found the relief from that, then the son would also continue that chase to...
No.
Okay.
The father will continue that chase.
Okay.
In his next life.
Okay.
But be aware that the son chose the father and the mother based on I don't know if I'm going to say. I'm going to say that Barbara said this because this is not my own knowledge. But Barbara says that the choosing of the parents is choosing parents who together most closely represent the vibrational rate of the spirit who is going to take over the child's body. Which means that you picked parents with whom you have a lot of affinity. And so it would not be surprising if you had certain things in common with your father. But you are not paying his karma. And it is not that they are his genes, because that's part of the 3D thing too. None of that has anything to do with it, but the fact is that you chose your father for a reason. And perhaps it was so that he could appear to teach you how to be a workaholic. Or appear to give you a gene and teach you how to be an alcoholic. I mean, but no. There's something in the Old Testament, there was the Jewish people believed that the sins of the father were passed on to the son under 3 or 4 generations or something like that. And that was the law, because that's what they believed. And remember that the common universal consciousness has a lot to determining what happens too, because that's what's in your mind and that's what you're manifesting. Then in the tape Joel that I heard of Joel's, he's talking about the fact that at some point somebody had a clarity that it was only for one generation. And so the law changed, and so the fallout stopped, of course, because now the law is different, and so the truth is different. And Joel was saying, under no generation, you sow, you reap. It's really that simple. And you reap at all levels, and the only way out is out the top, which is a nice way to go out. Okay, the third common topic of the infinite way is the nature of prayer. And I'm forced to use prayer and meditation interchangeably. I have great fun with my teacher Susan, who's a very Christian lady and prays a lot. And I've been hanging out with her for 18 or 19 years, and I used to be very Eastern, and I meditated a lot. And we did exactly the same thing. Joel says the only true prayer is being in that state which is beyond words and thoughts. And the goal of meditation is to get to that place which is beyond word and thought. So let's don't get hung up about the nature of prayer or the nature of meditation. We're talking about that thing which is prayer or meditation. We are not talking about, meditation is not the act of focusing your mind on a candle or something like that. Meditation is the process of attaining the mystical consciousness. And meditation is not the act of reciting mantras. Reciting mantras work very much like lullabies, and they do soothe you, and you can have good results from reciting mantras, and they may even have certain powers about them, but that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about meditation, we're talking about achieving mystical consciousness. And the other problem with meditation is that meditation refers to the whole process, and meditation also refers to that state at the end that we are attempting to achieve. So let's just be real careful. Like we have to be careful about which eye we're talking about. Let's be careful about which meditation we're talking about. I will try to be careful about that. And the first thing that came up in our earlier classes about the nature of God was we were talking about the purpose of meditation. And I started writing down the purposes of meditation. But they all turned out to be different ways of saying the same thing. So I will say them to you. One of them is to be aware of God. That's the purpose of meditation, to achieve that stillness in which you can be aware of God. When I'm thinking, when my mind is running, I'm not aware of God, I'm aware of my thoughts. It's in the stillness that I can be aware of the presence of God. And the purpose of meditation or prayer is to be aware of God. Another way of saying it is to open the door to the fourth dimensional consciousness. The Christian Church talks about a lot about I stand at the door and knock, and that's a reference to the fourth dimensional consciousness wanting to make contact with the three-dimensional consciousness, and the purpose of meditation is to open that door. Joel says lots of times God is not in the 3D world, God is only where God is realized. The purpose of meditation is to realize God, to get it in your appearance of 3D world. Other phrases are seeking spiritual grace, receiving God's wisdom, to know God aright, it says in the New Testament frequently. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's just a wonderful statement, and that's what meditation is for. Knowing the truth is not intellectual comprehension or reading books or any of that sort of thing. Knowing the truth is a result of realization, a result of clicks of knowing, and that happens through getting quiet and through meditation, not through doing research. You can do research, read a lot and get a lot of information and prepare your mind so that it can hear better. You can do a lot of things. It is an ancillary activity which can certainly support spiritual growth, but truth happens in meditation. You know truth as a result of clicks, and it happens in that moment that you are not thinking. And knowing the truth will set you free. That's a real clear statement. And another way people talk about it is to hear the still small voice. That again, when you're quiet, you can hear the still small voice. And all these things are just saying the same thing. The purpose is to have the actual experience of the presence of God. And in that, experiencing the presence of God, we're also experiencing the wisdom, the knowledge, the truth, the grace, the love, the harmony, the whatever, all those attributes that are correctly associated with God. And the other thing that we discussed is that praying for something doesn't work. Mostly people pray for things, and the flaw in that, given the nature of God as omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, then God already knows, and God is already here and everywhere, so God already knows, and God has all the power there is, so God can do something about it. So if you're going to God to ask for something, you're either assuming He doesn't know it, or that He is choosing to withhold it until you supplicate for it, or it's to pray for something is to have a concept of a Santa Claus type God, or a rewarding and punishing God, or a God who chooses to withhold and then reward based on sacrifices or prayer, or holding your mouth right, or whatever ritual it is that people try to go through to get God to do what they want. The fact is that God is already doing everything that God is ever going to do. God has been doing everything God is going to do since the beginning of time. If you want to experience what God is doing in your life, then you have to meditate, pray and meditate, but in the sense of getting silent and realizing God. And to the extent that you realize God, it will manifest in your life. But to go with words and thoughts asking for something prevents meditation, prevents prayer. The fact that your mind is busy is a barrier to prayer and meditation.
I have a question about this, and I've had it for a long time, so I'll just get it out now.
Great.
remember over the past few years, and Fred teaches me, there's been a couple teachers whose children have gotten very sick where I worked. One had cancer, one had that rare disease. And when both of those things happened, like the whole community got together, all the churches in the community, all the people, and really prayed for these two kids to recover. Now, and they both did. Now, I mean, like what you're saying, I understand. I mean, God already knew what was going on. It wasn't the prayers that worked. Was it the collective consciousness of seeing these children well that worked? Or were they just going to get well anyway? Or I get real confused there. Does that make sense?
Sure. The question is very valid, and everybody has that question. And of course, I don't know what the reality in that case was. The children may have been destined to get well anyway. There certainly is in the 3D world such a thing as mental healing. There is mental power. Mental power is the only power in the 3D world, and we see it evidenced in lots of cases. Voodoo is mental power. White witches and black witches is mental power. There is mental power. There's just no question about that. And enough people thinking good thoughts can have an effect. There's no question about it. So it could have been a mental healing. It could have been what was going to happen anyway.
But that's part of the 3D world that has nothing to do with God.
That's all part of the 3D world. It had nothing to do with God. God was not making the children sick, and God was not withholding a healing from them, and God did not heal them. God, the reality is those children were not sick. That was appearance in the 3D world, and the reality was that there was no sickness. There's just the mortal appearance of a physical body that has sickness. The reality is that those children are spiritual beings incapable of being sick.
So Joel would have seen them sick, right?
Right. And in Joel not seeing them sick, they would have healed. Like that. I mean, Joel would have healed them, 80 or 90% chance that Joel would have healed them on the spot from Hawaii at the first phone call. Because Joel was so clear that there is no disharmony in the perfect spiritual being, which those people are, that his consciousness would not see it. And any consciousnesses which were, or minds or whatever, I'm using the word consciousness again, but any minds that were linked to him, that had reached out to him and made contact with him, would have the same experience. And he could have in fact elevated those people to the point that they also saw harmony. It's not a matter of healing the disease. The disease did not exist. It's a matter of elevating the consciousness to the point that the harmony becomes visible. And Joel's consciousness was clearly that high. He was the most incredible healer ever, probably. I mean, he certainly healed a lot more people than Jesus, who was often considered to be the most amazing healer. But Joel did it for, well, he started in 28 and he did it until 64. And peak days, which went on for year after year, he was healing 135 people a day and answering 60 letters. So I mean, Joel has healed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And that was a matter of consciousness. And if any one of these people had a spiritual consciousness, that could have been the answer. It might have been your clarity on the situation that had a lot to do with that. For example, because your clarity on that has been pretty good in the time frame that we're talking about. Certainly had an effect.
I just listened to the tape I just listened to this last week. Also, Joel made a suggestion about how the thousands of families prayed for their sons who were at war, as well as the enemy's parents praying for their sons at war.
Some lived and some died.
Right.
Yes.
So
Joel does not quite chuckle when he said, "There is an incorrect universal belief that prayers are answered." prayers are not answered. He means by God. There is no God that answers prayers.
Because nothing needs to be answered, right?
Because, yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. Nothing needs to be answered because it's all perfect anyway.
That's right. Yes. And he points out that churches believe in two powers, which means that churches are not spiritual. Churches have a God with power for good, and churches have a devil with power for bad. The realization is that evil is impotent. Evil is just an appearance. Just an appearance like the subliminal advertising on the movie screen. Just an appearance. Let's see. Joel says, the only prayer of a righteous man is a prayer for spiritual realization or harmony or grace. And by prayer he means here the attempt to meditate and achieve the realization of that. So, with that in mind, that's really what infinite way prayer is all about. And as I said, prayer and meditation mean the same thing. He uses the word prayer because his student body is Christian Science and unity and various of the metaphysical Christian outgrowths, and they pray. So that's the reason he talks about the nature of prayer rather than meditation, but he also is aware of the fact that really the infinite way is one of the first teachings that really brought meditation to the Western world. So, Barbara does a nice thing about the stages of prayer, and I thought we could just talk about them for the next 15 minutes or so. The first stage is preparation, and that's learning to still the body. And the first thing you have to do in order to achieve this state of silence beyond word and thought is have a body which is willing to stay silent. And
that's the hard one.
It's a matter of practice. And the only good advice about that is if you fight it, it will fight you. And so if it itches, scratch it. You know. I mean, that's it. Get comfortable and scratch the itches, and get comfortable and scratch the itches and get comfortable. The other thing, of course, is that we don't need to meditate for an hour. So we're not talking about marathon, sitting silently. We're talking about getting comfortable so that we can stop being focused on our bodies. Then the second step is stilling the mind. And the same things that apply to the first principle apply to the second. You know, you can't stop your mind with your mind, but you can withdraw energy from it. The problem here is that the nature of the mind is to think. And thinking is what we're trying to not do. Now, Joel talks about contemplative meditation. And what contemplative meditation means is taking some truth, like, as ye sow, so shall you reap, or any statement of truth, peace be still and know that I am God, or any statement of truth. If you know the truth, I mean, Joel would take that statement and think about it and meditate on it in the sense of mulling it over in his mind and sort of chewing on it with his mind and thinking about it and thinking about the various meanings it might have. And he would just contemplate on that thought for a while until his mind ran down and got quiet. So what he would do is he would use that as an item on which to focus his mind. And then, it being focused on that item, he would sort of exhaust that item and achieve silence. And that was the way he quieted his mind. My mind is the kind that if you answer a question, it will generate 10 more. And so that has never worked for me. Contemplative meditation doesn't work for me. My mind will not run down. My mind will if it does ever exhaust this topic, it will immediately have another topic which it will bring up in order to show how clever it is about that one. So that does not work for me. The awareness exercise is a tool that Barbara devised to achieve. I find that the awareness exercise does allow me to go directly to the silence, but it helps to have had the experience of being in the silence, and that happened to me totally independently of any form of meditation or anything when I was with Rashneesh. I got dropped there once. So, in any event, the second stage is to develop the skill of quieting your mind. I find while we're on that, let me just a couple more things. The Buddhist meditation, the Vipassana meditation, says, watch your breathing. And when your mind runs, periodically your mind will take off, and when it is, notice where it goes, and then just come back to watching your breathing. Just notice where it goes, but don't fight it. Don't get angry at yourself or at your mind for doing it or anything like that. And it is worthwhile. I have found, and other people that have been with me have found, you will notice after a while that it keeps going to the same place, and make a note of these. And these perhaps would not be bad topics for another fourth step or a ninth step or a 10th step or something like that. I mean, these places that it keeps going and dwelling are probably places that you need to clean house in anyway. Your mind is not going to get quiet as long as there's unfinished business. So that works. The biggest thing that has worked for me is to withdraw energy from my mind. Just give it no energy trying to support its thinking or stop its thinking or anything. And if you just withdraw the energy, it will run out of gas. It's not a quick process, but it does happen. And Margaret Johnson, the lady that I was doing the mind study with, says that when your mind interrupts, just ask it, "Who's thinking, please?" And it will not answer. It will stop. and that's true. Just talk to your mind and say, "Who's thinking, please? Who's speaking?" And it will not answer. That works.
It's kind of like self-inquiry.
Yes, it is. That works. The third step is to sit in the silence. And that's the purpose, is to get to the silence. This is the state that's beyond words and thoughts. This is where you get clicks. When your mind has stopped, you may get a click, a sudden realization of the answer to some question you've been perhaps chewing on during the second stage, during your contemplative meditation. You may have been thinking about some question, and when you get silent, the answer may come. This is the point at which you may hear the still small voice. To add confusion to everything, Barbara calls this stage contemplation, although Joel calls the previous one contemplation. But this is the state that the awareness exercise will take us to directly, is into this state of silence, if we practice it. Now, this is not the goal, this is the necessary third step. And then the fourth step is the phase Barbara calls it communion, Joel calls it communion, and this also is what Joel means by prayer. This communion is, you're no longer just in the silence, you are now aware of the presence of God. You have a feeling, it is an experience, it's not intellectual at all, the mind is silent, but there is an experience of the presence of God, and there is an experience of flow between you and God. And this is a reality and experience. This is the case where the door is open. This is what is meant by the Spirit of the Lord is upon you. This is, what's the Christian, be still and know that I am God. This is the knowing that I am God. And then the fifth state is the state that Easterners refer to as samadhi. And this is the state where there is no longer a you in communion with God. There is only God. And that's what is meant by samadhi in the Eastern religions. And that, of course, is the highest state. Now, there are different levels of samadhi, but those seem to be, as far as I can tell, and I don't have experience with different levels of samadhi, but as far as I can tell, the difference in the levels of samadhi is whether or not you come back from it. There are samadhis that you visit and samadhis that you stay in. And
so if you're like a Rashneesh, you stay there?
Yeah, Robert stays there. Robert says that point blank if you ask him. But that's the Sahaja Samadhi, is the state where you... Robert's experience was he dissolved into the universe. And that was the last experience he had. That was when he was 14. From that point on, there was no Robert. There was universe, but there was no Robert. Well, I think we can finish this. That's the technique of meditation, is prayer as taught by the Infinite Way, both in practicing the presence and in the art of meditation. I've gone into it a bit more depth than those are that he may not discuss in there, much beyond the state of getting to the silence and having the experience, which he sometimes calls the click or sometimes calls God is on the field. That state, by the way, that communion state, is the state that needs to be achieved for healing. It is at that point that Joel rests his case. He talks about healing. Of course, he didn't do this at the end, but initially what he would do when he knew how to do this, when he had the words, is he would repeat some sort of truth sufficiently to elevate his consciousness to where he arrived at the state where he knew God was on the field. And God is on the field means this experience of the Spirit descending upon you, or the communion. He arrived at that experience. And when he had the experience of the reality of God, the consciousness was elevated, the apparent discord was impossible, the healing happened. Now, this is a long process, and it takes a long time to do it. The awareness exercise is a short circuit to try to get there. The other thing which works, that Joel recommends, is 10-second meditations. A 10-second meditation is a leap into the silence. Just stop. The idea is that if you just stop, you are in the silence. And you bypass the mind. You haven't given the mind the preparation, the getting seated, the going into the whatever position you want to sit in, or finding the right chair. You haven't warned your mind in advance that you're about to do this meditation so that it can be ready for you, to prevent you. What you're doing is just bypassing this, and the purpose of the 10-second meditation is to leap into the silence, which is also the purpose, as I say, of the awareness exercise. And Joel recommends never, in beginning meditation, spending more than 3 to 5 minutes, because there's not much to be accomplished by the time. Once your mind fires up, it's time to get up and cook your breakfast or whatever. Much better is to do, maybe 30 10-second meditations a day. Do a 10-second meditation every half hour, every 15 minutes, every chance you get. Just leap into the silence, build that muscle. It's like a spiritual gymnasium. It's like working out on a little curling iron or something. Just build the muscle. Just go to the silence and hold it for 2 or 3 seconds if you can, and go back to what you were doing. And that's a useful exercise to play with. All these things are to play with. You have to find out what works for you. Some people use mantras. I talked about mantras as being not meditation, but some people use mantras to quiet the mind. And chanting is the purpose of chanting in the Eastern religions is to focus the mind. You get the mind totally focused on the chant, and then this chant stops, and you're in silence. Rajneesh used to do wonderful, violently physical exercise type meditations where everybody would jump and scream and shout and holler and just go crazy. They were wild, wonderful things that were called meditations, which were these glorious dancings and jumpings and with great spirit and great energy, and then somebody over the mic would say, "Stop!" And everybody would stop, and the silence would just rush in and fill the space. And it would be a real shock. Another thing that Rajneesh said, if you want to hear the silence, go into a really noisy place. And I practiced hearing the silence at the end of the runways, where the jets are where the 747s are under full power, taking off at the west end of the runway, not the east end where they're gliding in, but at the west end where they're under full power, go there. And it will be easier to hear the silence against the background of that noise. It's a game. Okay, the purpose of all this is to achieve a state of grace, and the immediate practical result of that is a more harmonious life. I mentioned again that the practice is to practice meditating any way you can, awareness exercise or 10-second meditations, and probably awareness exercise and 10-second meditations and a more formal attempt at meditating morning and evening or whatever you can do. Reading and listening to the tapes to retrain your mind so that you have some spiritual truth in there. And hanging out with like-minded people who are on the same practice. These are the three things that I know of that will increase your awareness of consciousness, because they're the ones that have worked for me. They're the only ones that I have ever known to do. I don't know of anything else that I've done. I always hang out with higher people when I can, and I've been reading and listening to tapes and stuff like that continually, and I do meditate, and it works. And Joel says it unfolds from within us when we give up the desire or the search for outer harmony. Harmony is an inside job. It's a state of grace. If you're looking for outer harmony, you're not inside where harmony is. And he says, it's not just for you. He means spiritual teaching, spiritual training, these realizations, any of this stuff. It's not just for you. If God is pouring something into your consciousness, it is never just for you. It is for human consciousness. And those you are to pour it into are being prepared. So, this is not, the purpose of this is not to have a more harmonious life or to achieve things for ourselves. The whole purpose of the Infinite Way is to raise the level of human consciousness. They're almost bodhisattvas. They almost don't want to become enlightened until everybody's enlightened. The purpose is to elevate human consciousness through the elevation of your own. That's it on prayer and meditation. I mean, there's not much to say about it except why we do it and what the techniques are as taught by the Infinite Way, and we can all play with these, and it would be fun during the next few classes to share any experiences you're having, either good or bad, with playing with these games. Above all, don't take it seriously. This is not serious work. Your life does not depend on it. You have as many lifetimes as you require to get there. It's not serious. So let's talk about the awareness exercise. Anybody want to share their experience with the awareness exercise? Has it been working?
They don't know what it is, so.
Nelson does.
Fred doesn't, I think.
Does it take long to explain?
The awareness exercise, well, yeah, let's just review it. The first step in the awareness exercise is, if you would close your eyes, we can all do it. Let's all close our eyes. And become aware of your left hand. And the point is that we can do that. When you say become aware of your left hand, you become aware of your left hand. It's done without words or pictures. You don't do anything. It's not a mental exercise. It's a feeling exercise. Suddenly you're aware of your left hand. You just are aware of your left hand. And the point of that first step is to realize that you do have an awareness, this faculty called awareness faculty. So now become aware of your left hand. And now increase the awareness of your left hand. And you can increase it again. Okay. Were you successful at that? Were you aware of your left hand?
Oh, yeah.
And did it increase when you said increase? Okay, so the point is we have this faculty, and it does what we said. Now, that was the first stage of this exercise, is just to become aware of the fact that this faculty exists. It's separate from your mind. It's separate from your thinking process. It's separate from any of your six senses. It's an independent thing, and it can become aware of your hand or your ear or whatever you tell it to become aware of, and it will go there and it will increase. Okay, the next stage, the second week we practiced. Okay, now become aware of I. And you can say it to yourself softly, say I. We're talking about the big I. Self with a capital S. Be aware of I. And increase your awareness of I. I. Okay. Is everybody successful? Does everybody have some experience that they feel like was their I? Did you have some awareness of something that...
It was a little harder than the left hand.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as tangible, but...
I had some degree of success.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And did it increase?
Mm-hmm.
And the question I ask now is, where was this I? Where was it located?
Well, it was in my body, in my head, and I felt pressure increasing in my whole body.
Okay.
And then I expanded.
Beyond the body, you mean? So it's the awareness that we can achieve by playing with that, and play with it some, is that I is not located in any particular place in your body, and in fact it's not in your body. If you can expand it, then it means that in fact your body is in it, in the expanded state. So that's the second stage of the exercise, and these are things to play with. Once again, this is all a practice to play with. It's a tool to develop. And if you're already capable of getting into the silence, then you don't need to do this for yourself, but it turns out to be a very useful way to teach other people who haven't experienced the silence to do this. So it turns out to be a useful tool to get experience with. I was delighted with it because it just worked for me like that, and it's something that I can tell people with that works, and it's not easy to tell people who don't get dropped into the silence what that is. Okay, so let's do the third stage now, and the last stage. Okay, so once again, become aware of I. And now be aware of the silence behind I. And increase your awareness of that silence. Okay. What was your experience there? Did you notice what I mean by the silence?
Yeah. Can I ask a question related?
Sure.
In the books, in Joel's books, in addition to the contemplative type of thinking, he talks about creating a space of nothingness around you. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I haven't run across that.
And that's the main one I play with in his books, of creating this space of nothingness around you and then keep expanding it. I think he said something in the space of nothingness. If it's not of God, it can't exist. So it's like his way of teaching the way he healed. And that's the one I play around with a lot. And I can't even find the book where I read it, because I have 12 books. I'm reading 12 of his books at the same time. I'm only like a quarter of the way through each of them. But I practiced that on airplanes, and it's I don't know how that would tie in with what we're doing.
I think that's
it's almost the same thing.
It is. That's the silence. I mean, if you become aware of the I, then you can, if you look, become aware that there is the silence, the space of nothingness, this void, from which surrounding I. And what he's saying is he creates this void around himself. He creates this space around the I. It's the same thing. It's another approach, one that I wasn't aware of that Joel did. But it's the same point. There is this, and silence isn't the right word. Anya likes stillness, because silence, when she hears sounds, it denies silence, so she prefers stillness. Silence isn't the right word. Void isn't the right word. It is that state which is so nothing that you can see a void within it, you can hear silence within it, you can see space within it, you can hear thoughts within it, and of course you can't see anything unless it's against the background, which does not have that attribute. So it's less than void, it's less than still, it's less than silent, it's less than nothing, because you can recognize all these things. I mean, this is a very strange state. And it's, sorry to use this word, but it's tangible. It's very tangible. You know when you're in it. And that's the whole point. And the point of the awareness exercise is to get into that. The point of the 10-second meditation where you just stop is that you're in it.
When you say that, you mean just, like if you're doing something, just say to yourself, stop, and just stop?
Just stop.
And just...
It'd be much better if you had somebody else who would say it to you periodically. Stop!
That's the point of the beeping watch, right? Close your eyes and...
Just stop. But you can say that. Just say stop.
Right. And because it's such a change from everything that's going on, it just forces your mind to stop.
And there's a gap.
And watch the gap.
Watch the gap. It is the same gap that if you practice, you can become adept at this. When you first wake up in the morning and you're conscious, before the first thought is that gap. And you can become adept at lying in that gap for some period of time. But you have to set yourself up the night before. Because by the time you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to look for the gap, you lost.
So what do you say the night before? How do you prepare yourself for that?
I say, I've got to remember tomorrow morning to wake up and look for the gap.
Okay. That esoteric, huh?
I know that's pretty subtle, but I say that the last thing at night rather than the first thing in the morning.
Right.
And with that small change, it seems to work. And some days you don't. But if you work at it, you will start remembering it after the first three thoughts, and then after only the first thought, and then one day you'll wake up and you'll be in the gap, and you'll say, "That's it." And that was the end of it. But that's cool. You were there for a second. And Robert says point blank that gap is the state of enlightenment. What he's saying is being still, mind without mind, quiet, is the state of enlightenment.
So every morning we get a shot of that.
If you get it.
No, but
it can be that fast.
We're unconscious of it.
No, if you're unconscious, that ain't it. You got to be conscious of it.
Right.
You've got to be in that space. If it slipped past, it slipped past. Oh well.
Is there anybody that practices this all the time and it doesn't happen for?
I don't know. I don't know anybody that practices it all the time.
But practicing meditation. Like sometimes I feel frustrated thinking that I should be that I should have more gaps than I do. That I should be silent more than I. It seems like. It's not going to be like it's never.
That is your mind fighting for its survival.
Okay.
And the fact is that no, every minute that you spend doing this work adds up. It's money in a bank. You may not know it until you arrive somewhere. It's like climbing steps in the dark. Step, step, step. And after a while you feel like you're making no progress. And then all of a sudden you discover that last step was the last step. And you had no clue until you take the last step. But it all counts up. All those steps were getting higher. So just do it and wait for the clicks.
In his books, he gives a lot of hope that we can do what he did. Is there anybody, I've only been reading his books for less than a year. In your experience with his books, have you run into anybody who can heal like Joel did? Or is he once in a 100-year type of thing?
He was pretty amazing. There are a lot of people who can heal using instant
Using his technique.
Yes. Oh yes. There are a lot of spiritual healers. Many of his students are healers, and some of their students are healers. So it's even a technique that's transmittable and has gone on to the third generation.
Now they've gotten this technique by reading his books and practicing what he teaches in the books?
His students got it from him.
From him.
And their students got it from their teachers.
Did he transmit it to them, or just he taught them how? Because in one of his books he says, I would need to take somebody, he said, I wish I could take somebody away for 6 years and they'd have to be totally devoted to the teaching for 6 years, and then I could turn them into a healer.
Yeah, well, his students were with him. Barbara was there for 7 years. Most of his students were there for 15 or 20 years. And he probably, I'm sure he had at one time 50,000 Infinite Way families, but these are not his students. He probably had 10 or 15 dedicated students, and they all became healers. Now, part of it, the only reason I'm not giving you a direct answer is I don't know how much healing ability can come from the books and how much is through the transmission, being in the consciousness. But being in the consciousness accounts for a lot. We'll see.
And weren't you saying that Joel and Barbara's consciousness is with us?
It's available to us. One of the sheets, there's two sets of sheets there. One is the outline for the nature of man and the nature of prayer and meditation, and the other is Barbara's recognition exercises. The 3D world experience, the purpose of that, the way out of it, is to recognize that you're in it. And Barbara, who likes 7 steps, as the various 12-step programs like 12 steps and have 12 traditions and 12 principles and probably 12 ways to go potty. Barbara has 7 of everything, and she has 7 recognition exercises, and I've typed them up and produced copies there. Let's all take the first one and play with it this week. Let me have one, please, Diane.
You want to take
It's like a teacher.
We'll do one a week for the next 7 weeks. And what I'd like you to do is write the one we're working on someplace where you'll see it many times a day. I found it's very useful. The way I do it is I put a couple of these things. I have one. Okay. I've put a couple of these things on my money clip so that whenever I go to get a dollar bill, I get a reminder. But put them someplace that you see them and just think what it means, and also think how you would be behaving differently if it were true. The first one is, I recognize that since I was born human, I was born hypnotized, and I've been unaware of it. This is a statement that when we come into the 3D world as human beings, we are conditioned by world mind, we are conditioned by our parents' mind, we are conditioned by all of our conditioning in schools and everything else. And the fact that we're human means that we are hypnotized. By hypnotized means that we see this illusory 3D world as real. And the point of this exercise is to play with that, to think about it, and find out what it means, and look around you and see in what sense am I hypnotized? What does it mean that I was born hypnotized and am currently hypnotized, or else I wouldn't be doing this foolish exercise? And what would I be doing differently if I were aware of it? Being human, I'm unaware of it. The point is, suppose that first statement weren't true in my life. How would I be behaving differently? Okay, you see the flavor I'm saying about how to play with it for a week? The point is we're going to take these one at a week and let them soak into us and become aware of what it means to be hypnotized, and perhaps even recognize the fact that we truly are hypnotized and living in this hypnotized 3D world. Okay? So we'll do one a week, and next week we'll take 10 minutes or so at the end, and we'll all share in the last 10 or 15 minutes about what things occurred to us about being unaware humans. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Wait, I have a comment
Yes.
about the question that you asked a couple minutes ago about what kind of experiences do we have during the awareness exercise this week?
Cool. Yeah.
And there were 2 things. There was that one about needing to say to myself, instead of look behind or behind the silence, is step into the stillness. And when I say that, it's almost like there's this big sort of white, organic energy thing, and I kind of see myself stepping into it, and I just sort of am so immersed in it that I don't exist anymore. Like I'm just in it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Great. Go for it.
Write that one.
I don't practice the awareness exercise through the 3 steps. What I do is I will perhaps say to myself that I consciously enter the divine silence. I may say something like that, and when I say I always say it in that soft way that makes me aware of the fact that I'm referring to the 4th dimensional God consciousness, I, and all I do is I'm announcing to myself that I am making the conscious decision to enter the silence. Now, if that doesn't work, then I may back off to the be aware of the silence. And if that doesn't work, I may back off to be aware of I. And if that doesn't work, it means I don't have an awareness faculty, so I start becoming aware of my left ear until I get it fired back up. But you found a way to take the direct step, and that's perfect. That's the goal, and that's what the exercise you were talking about was about surrounding yourself with the void.
I still need to start with I, and then I say step into the silence, and that's when it.
Yeah, I always do that too because it is a conscious move. It requires an act of consciousness to go into the silence. It requires I, fourth dimensional I, to make a conscious act to go into the silence.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
The second thing that happened was, I think it was earlier this week or maybe after this class last week, where I felt, I guess the word is resistance to doing this awareness exercise because I had to think about why, but what I came up with was that the intimacy with God consciousness felt like overwhelming in a way. And then once I realized that, then I just let go of it. I thought, okay, that's what it was like. I was feeling something afterwards that was like, you know, when you share really intensely with a person, it almost feels too close.
I guess we could say that when we become one with God, who is closer to us than breathing, etc., that's the ultimately invasive experience. And I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
and
it felt really intimate.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's the other way. It's your oneness with God.
Yeah.
You're the peace. The intimacy is the other way.
Once I realized it, then it was okay.
Right. Great. That's wonderful.
It took me a second.
That's good stuff. Okay, let's be quiet for 4 or 5 minutes and let this settle. See if anything else needs to be said.